Hey, Bruce from Modern Driveline. This morning we have a customer who's brought in a transmission for us to make modifications to. So we want to do a quick tech with you and kind of explain some of the modifications and using our tail shaft housing, which is a front shift. The customer wants to move the shifter from the back to the front. We had built this transmission with electronic S10 tail shaft housing many years ago. He hasn't actually even used it yet, so he's decided to go to a mechanical driven speedometer. And the challenge you have with doing this type of conversion is people will typically try to find, let's say, an S10 tail shaft housing. The mechanical S10 two-wheel drive S10 housing has been gone for quite some time, and they were built on a non-world-class platform. Many of the transmissions that people are using today are basically the world-class model. We do have more information on our website as to what classifies a non-world-class from world-class, but I'll cover a couple of the key tips and incompatibilities between the transmission and tail shaft housings and things to be considered. So what was brought to us is this S10 reproduction housing. Looks great on the surface, meaning that it's a great casting, it's a die cast product. My speculation is probably an overseas product, nothing wrong with that in the sense of the construction. However, there are some key things that we found that are, well, missing. An example, one of these is the vent that you see here. There's supposed to be a vent that allows the transmission to equalize and vent that extra gas off. There's no shift block. This particular shift box is shorter than, let's say, a Mustang 1 if you're converting from a Mustang transmission, so you can't move the part forward. So that's a key problem. Now, I spoke a little bit about non-world class, and inside here is an area where the fifth gear has a pump, a little impeller. On a non-world class, the configuration is different, and for a world class, this is smaller. And what the little pump is doing here is you have a little piece here on the counter shaft, and what it's doing is it's moving oil up into the back of the tail shaft housing, keeping the tail shaft bushing lubricated when you're at cruise. Other key things about this housing: yes, it has a mechanical speedo here on the back. This is exactly a reproduction of the original. The two holes won't match when you go to make the conversion on a Ford unit. There are 2 inches difference in there. The other thing that they did reproduce, just like the S10, is this extra piece. What this was intended for was there was 2 struts that came forward, tied onto the bell housing to give the transmission more stability. I'm not quite sure the dynamics of why they did that, but that's what GM did in its day. Now, the other thing that we've noticed about this housing is some of the tolerances. Now, I have verified on this slip yoke that this is 1 inch, 500, excuse me. That's the specification that it should be for a Ford 28 spline slip yoke. Now, mind you, a 27 spline slip yoke is slightly smaller. Now, knowing that it's supposed to have a GM slip yoke put in, this should actually fit tight. Well, as we insert it in here, this is halfway inserted, and there's quite a bit of play here. So that is obviously a concern. So when we make our tail shaft housings, we press them in with the proper bushing to a very tight tolerance, and we actually do a post-machine machining process to assure that that tolerance is held tight. So that's obviously a concern. So at this point, my advisement to a customer would be not to use that part for this type of project, okay? Now let me go over some of the features of how we built our housing. We actually utilized the speedo of the Ford unit. So this allows you to use the existing gear in the transmission, no modifications. Now, again, going back to, we had to do a modification here. Let me get this housing out of the way. This transmission, the gear would have been for a Ford over here. However, the S10 position is 2 inches further back, and there's no provisions to mount a gear there. So back in the day when we used to do these, we had to make a couple of special parts, put the main shaft, we either dismantle this transmission or put the whole transmission as you see it on a mill and be able to counterbore into a hardened shaft with carbide bit. Well, that requires a lot of time and effort. And so that's what motivated us to be able to make a housing that can use the existing gear. So when we casted up our unit, we actually made sure to utilize the Ford connection. The other key piece to ours, as I mentioned a moment ago, is in this cavity area, we built it so that it has that world-class configuration on the pump. So we're able to get that oil to move